Welcome again to another Visual Basic lesson. My name is Fred Mjomba. Now, today let me talk about data type conversion. So far we've been talking about, and we have talked in class about data types. We understand in Visual Basic we have the variant, we have the string, we have the integers, we have the single, we have the double, we have the boolean, we have currency and what have you. Now, it happens in some scenarios that you may need to convert one data type to another, especially maybe you are carrying out some arithmetic function. Maybe you're dividing two integers and the result will not be an integer. If I divide 10 by 3, then the result has a decimal point, so it is no longer an integer. So in that case, I need to think about type conversion. So when you're talking about type conversion, again, we also mean we can convert a string to an integer, or vice versa. You can convert an integer to a string. Now, the most likely scenarios will be, as I have told you in class, when you get a user input, for example, from a text box, somebody is typing a number. It is not always captured as a number. It is stored as a string. Even if you type 10 in your text box, it is always stored as a string because inputs are taken as strings. So you may need to convert it now from it being a string to a number or to a float or to whatever. So you'll have to use some functions. In Visual Basic we have some functions. Functions are a group of codes that has been made available for you. They are there built inside the Visual Basic. So the first type of function is a function to convert something to a boolean or to a boolean value. Bool has two values, either true or false. So we have a function called C, that is capital C, then bool, the word bool. No spaces, it is C bool. So C bool is a function to convert any type to a bool. If you want to convert any type to a byte, then you use a function called cbyte, capital C, then byte, the word byte. If you're converting something to currency, then you have a function called C, then car, the word CUR, not double R, but just one R, is a function to convert something into a currency. Then you have another one to convert something or a data type into a date. We have CDate, capital C, then date. So you're converting probably something into a date. We have another one to convert types into decimals. Decimals are simply numbers with some highest precision. So CDes, capital C des, is a function to convert something to a decimal. You have a function to convert something to a double. Double again is a number that has precision of up to maybe 15 digits. So you have function called CDBL. The word DBL, capital D, is for double. So CDBL is a function to convert a number to double. Then we have CInt, int in small, lowercase. C is capital. So CInt is a function to convert a number into an integer or to convert a data type into an integer. Then we have CLong, CLNG. CLNG is a function to convert a data type into a long. Then we have CSNG. So SNG is single. Single is a floating number, or is a number that has a precision up to 7 digits. Then we have CSTR. STR is for string. contracted form for string. So we have CSTR is a function to convert a type into a string. Then we have CVAR. CVAR is a function to convert something into a variant, because variant, we said, is a default Visual Basic data type that can take any type of data type, string, whatever, numbers, and what have you. Then we have CVAR. CVAR is for error. It handles the error that you're going to display in your program. Now, a conversion function will always be placed at the right-hand side of the calculation statement. So if you are to use some of these functions, then ensure that they appear on the right-hand side of your expression. Now, Visual Basic also has some built-in functions. And these built-in functions are simply functions that have been programmed, and they are stored within the code, and they fall under the various categories. And these functions are simply procedures that return values. You know, sometimes students get confused when you talk about procedures, functions, and subprograms, which I'll talk about them later. But if we are using the word function, then put in your mind that there is always a return, or there is a value that is given as an output when the function does whatever it does. Now, one of the functions that is built in Visual Basic is a function that manipulates date and time. So we have several functions that work on date and time. For example, we have year into brackets, months into brackets, day. So if you are to reveal which year is it, you can say year, then into brackets the word now. The word now simply invokes a function that gives us the current date and year. If you say month now, then it will give you the current month. And if you say day into brackets the word now, then simply you are saying give us the current date or the current day. We have also functions that deal with formatting. Sometimes you may need to format input or to format output. Just as we were doing in structured programming, where we are talking about some functions for formatting input and output, and we had formatters, or some characters used to format your input or output. You also have format function in Visual Basic. So this is a function that basically formats something. You can format a date, you can format a string, you can format whatever it is. So the format function accepts a numeric value and converts it into a string. So with the specified format, an example will be if you wanted to format, for example, an expression to become a date, then you can have the format function, then into brackets you have your expression, your numeric value expression, then comma, those other parameters, you can format them maybe in whatever parameter that you want to format it into. Yeah. So examples have been given in your notes, but the format function will take some parameters there which have been given in commas. So you have the expression that which you want to format it, then what parameters, how do you want it to be formatted? Okay. Now, just in line with what we have been talking about, the built-in functions, I can also talk about what we call subprograms. We understand when we are doing a program in any language, it is always a complex thing you may need to break down your complex problem into some smaller units or some smaller functional units. So we normally use the terminology called subprograms in Visual Basic to mean that we may split a complex program or a complex problem into some simply functional programs that can be joined together to become one. Now, let me start by the word procedure. A procedure is a group of statements that performs specific tasks in a program. Yeah, and a procedure can be called within another procedure. By calling, I mean you can invoke it, or you may require it to perform a particular task, then it hands over the control back to the preceding procedure. Now, a subprogram is any part of a program that performs one or more related tasks. So if you have split your program into areas whereby you have different tasks being handled by different group of code, then that breaking it down becomes a subprogram. So a subprogram is any part of a program that performs one or several tasks, and these tasks of all they are related tasks. A subprogram has a name. It has its own independent name, and it is normally written to work independently. That means it can run on its own. So it's a fully functional program that you may require it to perform another function or to perform a particular function in your program. So it works independently. This is a subprogram. Now, benefits of using subprogramming or of using sub-procedures, I'll be substituting these things, because a procedure again is a group of statements that has a name that performs a particular task, but it doesn't have a return value. So that is a procedure. A procedure will just carry out some task and break down your code into simpler units that you can reuse. So advantages of subprogramming is that it breaks your program into several logical sections. And the smaller the programs are, they make your programming easier. Debugging or removing bugs or errors from your program becomes also easier. And to maintain a program becomes easier. That's why we break down a program into subprograms, into some procedures. It also makes the repeated parts of your operations, if you're going to have a repeated operations in your code, then they make them easier. Yeah, and you avoid writing a lot of code because you can use repetition. You can do some repetition, iteration. Also, the element of code reuse. There are a lot of procedures that have been stored in your program that you can just invoke them, or you may call them to perform a particular task, and they exit. So they bring the element of code reuse. You're using a code that is already there for you. You don't have to think about it. Okay, again, with subprograms, you can split your bigger problem, your bigger project into teams or into divisions and assign different functions to different programmers. So that is how important it is. You can assign different functional entities to different team members. Now, let's talk about a procedure. Now, I've said a procedure is a group of statements that carries out a particular task, specific task. It has a name and it is independent. Now, a procedure can be sub. The word sub, it can be sub. It can be a function, or it can be a property procedure. I want you to get this. A procedure can be a sub program, or it can be a function, or it can be a property procedure. What do I mean? I've talked about subprogram. A subprogram is basically a program that has a name and does one or two or more tasks, and it works independently. A function is also a procedure, but this one has a name. This one runs independent. This one carries out one or more tasks, but with a function, again, it has what we call a return type. It should give us some result or some output which conforms to a particular type. By type, we mean what data type. So a function, if it was working on integers, it can give us a return of integer, or it can give us a null or a void return. That means it can return nothing. A function, again, can have parameters, or it may not have. So a function will have some parameters, and by parameters I mean there will be some placeholder for some data that it's going to work with. So the parameters, they are placed inside the parentheses or the brackets. Yeah, a procedure may not have those parameters, but a function will have parameters. It may have or not. Then a function is also called for it to be complete. So once you define a function, for you to use it to give you whatever it does, you have to call it. By calling it, you supply it with arguments. Arguments are the real values that you want to be placed in those placeholders. You call them arguments. Yeah. The parameters, sometimes you call them formal parameters because they are just placeholders or variables to store some values. So we call them formal parameters. Now, when declaring some of these procedures, you may use the word public or private, depending on whether your function or your procedure, you may want it to have a global scope or a local scope. So if you want your function or your procedure to be available in your entire code, you may make it public so that it can be called or it can be invoked. Now, some of the examples of some functions we have are like the message functions and what have you. Also, procedures can be public or they can be private. But by default, they are public because they can be called by other procedures within your program or within your module. They can be used. So we make them public. So use the keyword public, then the procedure name, then your parameters, then end sub. The word end sub is if you're doing a sub procedure. If you're doing a function, then you use the keyword function, to define a function, and you end your function with the word end function. So it's different when you are declaring a function vis-a-vis when you are declaring a sub procedure. A sub procedure will use the word sub. So you can decide to make your sub procedure public or private, and end sub. If you're doing a function, then you have to use the word function, then the name of the function, then the parameters, and you end your function with the word end function. Now, we have so far also talked about event procedures. So in Visual Basic, it's an event-based programming methodology, code. So events are initiated, for example, maybe when you move your mouse or when you press some keys. So events also have procedures, and for you to understand or for you to know it's an event procedure, in most cases it normally have the name of the control. For example, an event is happening on a command button or on a form. That means that is the name of the control. Then underscore the event name. So for example, I'm clicking. It's a click event. So you say, and I'm clicking on a form. So the form will be my control name, form, maybe form 1. Then underscore, the event is click. Or if the event is loading, I'll say form underscore load. That's how event procedures are defined. And you use the word sub when you're dealing with some of these procedures, because they are procedures, therefore they are sub-programs. So we use the word sub. We also have general procedures. General procedures are just declared when several event procedures need to perform the same functions. So if you are performing some actions and you may need to write a procedure that is going to be used maybe to carry out some task. If I'm calculating the area of a square, I can write a procedure that accepts length or it accepts side as one of the parameter, and I'm going to compute the area. So I'll have a procedure called square area and it's going to do the area, and after it does that, it's going to, I'll end that sub procedure. So I can designate it as a public procedure for me to use it anywhere I want it to give me the square area. Property procedures is simply a procedure that returns or assigns values to properties on objects. We understand most of the objects we place on a form, even the form itself has properties. So if I wanted to put a value, to assign a value to a form, for example, the color of the form, I wanted it to be red. So I can use, or I can write a property procedure to assign that value to that form. So we have some methods which we use when we talk of property procedures. One of the methods we use is the property let. So the property let is a procedure to set the value of a property. So let is like setting, give it this value. And then I have the other one called property get. This one is to return the value of the property, or to show me what value is there. We also have the property set, a procedure that sets references to an object. Yeah, so now all these things we've been talking about, functions, procedures, subprograms, they take in parameters. So parameters are simply what variables are supplied, or what values are supplied inside the parenthesis, so that they can be used by a procedure or a function. And these values, we normally call them, the parameters can be formal or can be just arguments. So, wamekuja? Yeah, so parameters can be formal or actual. So when you talk of parameters, we are simply saying, for example, in a function, then within the parenthesis, we have placeholders for values. So these placeholders for values are called formal parameters, where you can have, for example, I have a function called student, and the student has age, has a name, the student has grades. Then the age, the name, and the grades will become my formal parameters, or it will be some sort of variables to store age and the name of the student and the grades. So I'll have 3 formal parameters. Now, when I define this function and it is complete, when I am calling it, I'll need to supply something to be stored in the age, to be stored in the name, to be stored in the grades. So the values that I supply, we call them arguments when we are calling a function. So when I need to use the function called student to give me the name of the student, the grade, and the age, then I'll have to supply some arguments. So is the student name Fred? Is the age of Fred 30? Is, his grades are what? Those are the arguments or the really values that we supply to a function. Now let me end there. This has been a long lecture.